Hey everyone, I'm Liz Fairy and this is our new kitten Zuko. And today we'll be showing you how I made this cute mushroom house for him to hang out in. Before I go on, I should bring up that this video is not one of my normal tutorials. This will be more of a project diary showing you bits of the process of putting this little house together. I of course have a ton of tutorials already on the channel showing you a lot of these same techniques, so I will link the relevant tutorials in the description below if you want to see more in-depth instructions on how to do something like this. You can also find a full list of the materials I used for this project in the description below, or if you're interested in commissioning a piece for me for yourself, you can get in touch with me on Instagram at LizFairy through direct message. The intention of this video is to inspire fellow fiber artists and creators to use similar techniques to make their own art. Now let's get started with this project. I began the floor of my little house by creating a double magic circle using 2 strands of white yarn at the same time. I'm using a bigger hook than I normally would, and 2 strands at the same time, so that I can make the house get bigger faster. This probably would have taken forever using my normal size E hook. This one is a size J. Next I increased 6 times per row to make the circle bigger. If you want a more detailed explanation on how to create a magic circle, or how to increase the circle, the links to those tutorials are below. Later on in the video, you'll see that I at first used the same color for the bottom as I used for the stem, but I ended up frogging that and starting over because I just did not have enough of that color. So I decided to use white, since I have a ton of it and no one's going to see the bottom anyway. Once I got the circle to a size I liked, I stopped increasing, then I changed colors to my main stem color, a light beige yarn. And I started to single crochet. The link to my color changing tutorial is also below. I just went on for a few rows, basically until I made the height that I wanted the doorway to sit at. This is because I'll be adding a little cushion to the bottom of the mushroom house later, so I wanted to make this part about the same height as the cushion will be. You don't have to add a cushion, and if you want, you could just begin to make the doorway right away, just skip to the next step. Next I began the doorway. For this part I worked in rows instead of in a spiral around the circle. I skipped about 15 stitches of each row to make an opening for the doorway. Then I kept on adding rows until the height of the skipped area was almost as tall as I wanted the doorway to be. If you're making a more rectangular opening for the shape of your door, go on until you reach the height that you want for the doorway, but if you're making an arch-shaped door, go on until you reach the height you want before the arch of the door would start to curve. So basically the rectangular section of the doorway. Next, I began to create that arch. If you're making a rectangular shaped door, this is a lot easier. You would just chain the same amount of stitches you skipped to make the doorway, then just continue to add rows of single crochet until your house reaches a good height. But for the arched door style, it requires a bit more shaping, which means a whole lot of juggling increases and decreases. There might be an easier way of doing this, which I might explore if I eventually make an actual tutorial for this project, but let me just show you how I got this shape this time. First, I chained the height that I wanted for the arch section, which is the unrectangular part of the doorway shape, which for me was about 3 chains. Then I chained the same amount of stitches that I skipped to make the bottom of the doorway, which was 15. Then I once again chained the height that I wanted my arch to be, which was 3 chains. Now I began to work in the round again, so into the first stitch on the other side of the doorway. Then I continued until I got back to the other side of the doorway, until I was a few stitches before the chain, because I'm going to start to increase and decrease there to shape the arch. Basically, I made a total of 4 decreases, 2 on each side of the arch, and a total of 4 increases spaced out along the middle of the arch per row. This is what I mean by juggling increases and decreases. In the first row, I decreased 1 time, 2 stitches before the chain. Then I decreased once again in the chain by simply skipping the first chain. And I did the same thing to decrease on the other side, skipping the last chain and then decreasing 1. I kept adding rows with 2 decreases on each side and 4 increases spaced throughout the middle until the middle of my arch was the same height that I wanted the final house to be. In the rest of the rows for this part, since I was working into plain stitches rather than a chain, I just did 2 regular decreases instead of skipping a stitch for one of the decreases, and of course I continued to add my 4 increases in the middle. Now that I finished increasing the top of the arch to the height of the house, I started working in rows again to fill in the sides of the arch until the height matches all the way around. This part is a little complex, but basically I just did 2 decreases at the beginning and end of each row. First, I marked the stitches at the center of the arch, which were about the right height of the house already. Then I single crocheted until I reached 2 stitches before the first marked stitch at the middle of the arch, and decreased 2 times. Next I turned the work, then decreased 2 times again. Then I'll continue until I reach the other side of the arch, where I'll do the same thing. Decrease 2, then turn the work, and decrease 2 again. Then continue to repeat this process until the entire top of the work is straight. When I finished straightening the top of the house, I added a row of slip stitches to finish the top edge nicely. When I had gotten all the way around, I fastened off the yarn, and eventually I'll sew in all the ends. Now that I finished the actual house, I added some cardboard for some structure. I cut a piece of cardboard to match the circumference of the floor of the house, rolled it into a circle, and placed it inside. I pulled the walls of the house up until they seemed more or less level, and then I used a pen to mark where the top of the house ended up on the cardboard. I cut off the excess and put the cardboard back inside. I ended up cutting the cardboard a little straighter than my initial marking by marking it with a ruler just to make it look a little neater. Next, I added a few rows of decrease to the back loops of the top of the house to make a sort of lip to secure the cardboard a little more. I decreased 6 times per row. I just guessed where to put my decreases for this part because I didn't want to spend the time counting my stitches. Once I finished making the lip for the cardboard, I fastened off the yarn, and I'll sew that in later. Next I marked the shape for the opening with my pen, and I cut it out with a pair of utility scissors. Next I made the cap of the mushroom. I began the same way that I did for the floor of the house, with a double magic circle using 2 strands, this time of my red yarn. Then I increased 6 times per row to widen the circle. To make the spots on the cap though, I changed colors to white every once in a while to create white spots all over the cap. You can see this technique in more detail in my Jumbo Yoshi Easter eggs tutorial. Since this is a much larger project, a lot of the spots are much bigger than I made in my Easter eggs video, but the technique is the same. Just make sure that you don't forget to keep doing that basic increase 6 times per row while you do the color changes for the spots, so that the shape of the cap keeps getting wider. I didn't keep track of the color changes at all, but you can sort of get the general idea of how I got this look. The edges of these spots do look a little messy, but don't worry, I clean them up later. Once the size of the circle was about as wide as I wanted it to be, which should be at least a little bigger than the circumference of the house itself, I stopped increasing and started creating rows of single crochet until the cap reached the depth that I wanted. I still kept going with my pattern of color changes to keep making my spots. Then, once I had a good enough sized bowl, I did 2 rows of decrease with 6 decreases per row to create a bit of a lip at the bottom of the cap, so that it could sit on top of the house. I didn't film this part though. Once I had a good sized lip, I changed colors to white and then added a few rows of single crochet. This is because I'll be making a zipper pouch that fits into the empty space, and I want there to be an extra lip to sew the zipper onto. But before I can add my pouch, I need to outline all the spots on the outside. To do this, I basically just did a row of slip stitches around each spot through the fabric of the cap. You can see this technique in more detail in my Yoshi egg tutorial that I mentioned earlier. Then, rather than sewing in all those ends, I created a fabric liner zipper pouch, and I hand sewed it to the underside of the cap. I didn't film this either, but basically I just cut out 2 circles that were about the same circumference of the cap, as well as a long rectangle whose length was the circumference of the cap, and whose width matched the width of the cap. Then I sewed them together with a huge gap for the zipper, which I also hand sewed to both the pouch and the cap. I made sure that the right side of the fabric was facing inside the pouch for the bottom and the sides, and the right side was facing out for the top. I also made sure that the seams were on the outside of the pouch so that they aren't visible when you open it. Now this project is done. Let's see how it turned out. I think it looks super cute, although there's a couple of things that I would maybe try to do differently if I ever made an actual tutorial for this project. But more importantly, what does Zuko, our new kitten, think about his new little house? He seems to approve, but I'm so glad that I made the cardboard removable so that I can always cut out another one if this one gets too chewed up. Overall, I think I'm really happy with how it turned out. What do you guys think? Should I make a tutorial for a project like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you feel inspired to make something using this or any of my designs, I'd love to see your creations. You can find all of my social media links in the description below, or you can tag me on Instagram at LizFairy. If you enjoyed this tutorial, you could press the like button or share it on social media, and if you'd really like to help out the channel, you can donate to my Patreon. You can get some pretty cool perks through Patreon, like seeing my videos early, access to some of my prototype patterns, and discounts in my RalphReal store depending on your level of donation. You can find out more about that at patreon.com/fairyrings. You could also subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss my next video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!